Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's July 28th program, Ending Homelessness in Eugene, All Hands on Deck. My name's Andrew Calick. I'm the president of the City Club of Eugene. Today, City Club comes to you live from the 5th Street Market District in the heart of downtown Eugene, and it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and to all of you joining us here in person, online, and over the radio. For 3 decades, the City Club of Eugene has remained dedicated to its founding mission to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You're invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, to learn something new, and to take active steps to make a difference in this city and region that we all love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone, so a special thank you to our Platinum, Community, and Diamond sponsors. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare provider for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. Thank you as well to the City of Eugene and Lane County for their support. Now, whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a longtime listener, I invite you to support our work as well by becoming an individual member, a business or community sponsor, or simply to suggest an idea for an upcoming program. You can do all those things and more at cityclubofeugene.org. Your support and engagement make these community conversations possible. And as we say every week now, City Club isn't just about conversation. It's about taking that conversation and translating it into action, engaging our elected leaders and one another in the issues impacting our community. That's why today we are going to try something new for City Club. We invite those of you attending here in person, and we've got a wonderful room here, to join a hosted table discussion following today's program. We can call it Cookies and Conversation. The cookies are over there, but you only get them if you stay for the conversation. We'll talk about what resonated with us today, what we learned, what we think should happen next as we seek to end homelessness in Eugene. It's going to take all of us. And now it's my privilege to welcome back to the podium today's program coordinator and City Club past president, Karin Knudsen. Karin.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a delight to see you all here today. Rare, brief, and non-recurring. These are the words that are used to describe homelessness in communities that have worked to end it. These are not the words used to describe homelessness in Eugene, at least not yet. In 2019, an analysis of federal data confirmed that Eugene had the worst per capita homelessness rate in the nation, ahead of both Los Angeles, who's number 2, and New York City, who's number 3. In comparison with other US cities looking at the same data, Eugene has 432 people experiencing homelessness per 1,000 people in population. For reference, Oregon's rate overall is 350 people per 100,000. And according to Lane County, 4,531 people were experiencing homelessness countywide in June 2013. Just over 3,600 of those people were living in unsheltered conditions, 80%. Here to share recommendations from the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce's research, the City Club welcomes 3 speakers, Brittany Quickwarner, Mike Coughlin, and Karen Sachs. Brittany Quickwarner is president and CEO of the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. Mike Coughlin is a member of the Chamber's Business Leaders Task Force on Homelessness and owner and CEO of Burley Design. And Karen Sachs is Devs Northwest's Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Strategic Relationships. The 3 of them have a lot to share about current work that is underway in our community to better understand the challenge we face and to come to an understanding of what a community vision to end homelessness in Eugene might look like. So with that, welcome to City Club, Brittany Quick-Warner.
Hello, good afternoon. I'll take this off for now. Timing myself because I could be up here all afternoon. All right, good afternoon. My name is Brittany Quick-Warner, and I have the honor of serving as the President and CEO at the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. Our chamber has just over 1,200 members, and our mission is to support a vibrant local economy and a community where businesses thrive, but where individuals can live happy, healthy lives as well. Many of you may be asking, why is the chamber presenting on homelessness? And if I was honest, sitting in your seat 3 years ago, I would have been asking the same question. But over the last few years, things have changed. In 2020, as the pandemic was consuming our community, we, like many other communities across the country, as our shelters had to reduce their inventories, the visibility of our unsheltered homeless crisis increased. Unsanctioned camping across the community became much more prevalent, and we started getting a lot more calls. I was picking up the phone on a regular basis from business leaders asking, what is the chamber doing about homelessness? This is one of the biggest issues facing not only our broader community, but our business community as well. In early 21, I went to our board as we were discussing how to best serve our members and community, and I shared that the number one thing I was hearing from our business leaders was their concerns around the state of the homeless crisis in our community. The board agreed this was a critical issue that we should be finding a way to influence, and we weren't exactly sure what that was, though. We figured we had two options. We could either get really loud and angry, we could march down to City Hall, and we could pound our fists on the table and point our fingers at our elected officials and say, why aren't you fixing this? Or we could get really deep and strategic and work to understand the crisis on a level that would actually allow us to bring solutions to the table and support from the business community for action. They agreed that one of our core values was bold leadership and not taking the easy route, so we set out on a path to learn more. Over the period of about 4 months, we met with over 200 community members, nonprofit directors who work in this space every single day, city and county staff, law enforcement, neighbors, business leaders, and unhoused individuals themselves to better understand what our current system looked like, what was working, and what needed to be changed. With that information and research that we did and best practices gathered from communities across the country, we published the state of our homeless crisis. We weren't expecting to or claiming to be experts on this issue, but we had gathered a whole lot of information from the people who were in our community, and we wanted to provide a tool for the general community to better understand where we stood. In that report, we summarized our findings into 8 recommendations. 1, we needed better quality data. In order to really solve a hairy crisis, you gotta understand it as best as you possibly can. Number 2, we had to identify a shared goal, a vision that we could all get behind, and then come together as a community to achieve that. Number 3, we have to figure out how to increase service provider capacity. There are groups in this community who are doing this work day in and day out who are under-resourced and overworked, and we have to fix that if we're gonna fix our system. Number 4, we have to address the lack of resources for both shelter and affordable housing. You'll hear a lot more about the issue of housing and the solution that it is for this crisis later. Number 5, we need to increase our wraparound services. Just getting folks into housing or shelter is not enough. We have to provide them the services they need to actually get well. We have to address enforcement and accountability. Now, we're not saying that we need to go down a path of criminalizing homelessness, quite the opposite, but we have to address the crime that is happening in our community and make sure that we're transitioning from a culture of tolerance to one of accountability and wellness to see people move out of these situations. And the last, but I think one of the most important things, is we need to rebuild community trust. One of the things we heard over and over and over again is that people are losing hope that we can even do anything about this crisis. And a community that is hopeless will never achieve what it is we have to achieve here. So we knew the chamber wasn't qualified or capable to solve all these problems, as we have no intention of becoming a direct service provider, but we did feel like there were a few key areas that we could contribute to help move us forward. The first was to launch a business leaders task force. We wanted to bring the business community into the conversation to help figure out where they could plug in to be the most helpful. The second, we wanted to conduct a cost study. We heard from a lot of folks across the community that part of this sense of hopelessness was, one, not having a shared plan and understanding what the plan was, but two, people didn't understand how much money we were spending on this crisis. They couldn't understand the complexity of that funding system in our community. And the third was committing to convene a strategic group of cross-sector community leaders to build a coalition to work on this long-term plan to solve this crisis. So in 22, we set out to move those areas forward. We started by launching our Business Leaders Task Force. I thought after this report, I'd get about a dozen business leaders to step up and volunteer to do this with us. We had over 100 businesses reach out within a month of that report being released saying, we want to be at the table, we want to be a part of this, we feel like there's a role for us to play. That has grown to not only be business leaders, but we have folks from across the community, service providers coming together on a roughly monthly basis to try to understand, learn from each other, and find ways to collaborate and innovate. We also spent time working with our government partners to understand the resources and shortfalls that they were seeing in funding and capacity. One common thing we heard again and again from our community members was this frustration and sense of hopelessness I mentioned, because they didn't understand what our community was working towards. We wanted to move the needle and help them understand that. So we got agreement from the City of Eugene, Lane County, and the City of Springfield, and a few others to conduct this cost analysis of our homeless system. Our goal is to aggregate information and data about all the different funding sources that we currently have and the uses of those funds in our community into one place so community members can better understand the funding mechanisms our system is supported by. This work is nearing completion, and we hope to have a report out in the fall this year. Beyond the Business Leaders Task Force meetings, we wanted to keep building relationships and trust with local leaders in this space to understand how we could support their work. We spent time visiting organizations, getting to know successful programs across the community, and learning from them where the gaps existed. This work was key as we started to build the foundation for a cross-sector coalition. So after setting that foundation in 22, in 23 this year, we began gathering a handful of experts and representatives from various sectors across our community to determine what a community-led coalition could accomplish. Our goal here is to develop this formal coalition of community members who will align efforts and commit to supporting a long-term roadmap for addressing homelessness with a clear why, what, and how. Starting with our why, our shared vision for our region around ending homelessness has become really clear. We envision a community where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. That doesn't mean ending homelessness. We know that that is not a reasonable goal. But when we do find someone who is unhoused in this community, we want them to be able to find the services they need to exit that situation as quickly as possible and hope that they don't find themselves in that situation again. So moving to the what. Alignment around the top strategies and tactics that we should prioritize as a community and execute together. The key here is that we are not starting from scratch. We have over a dozen plans in this community that touch on some sort of tactics around how to solve this crisis. And that's part of the problem. We have a dozen plans. We need one shared plan that the broader community can understand and wrap their heads around. So we're taking those dozen or so plans that currently exist and boiling down to the key areas and the top priorities and areas of focus. And then we want to add measurable goals and timelines to accomplish each of those things. Those draft priority areas right now, we're in progress of working on those together. The first is housing. Like I said, you're going to hear from Karen about this being probably the number one thing that we as a community have to figure out how to solve if we're actually going to solve our homeless crisis. The second is shelter. The third is wraparound services. We have got to be able to serve the community members who are vulnerable and need that. We have a mental health crisis in this community. The county is doing amazing work around building a stabilization center, and that's a key component of the success of this effort going forward. Nonprofit capacity. I touched on the ability for our nonprofits to actually do this work and to sustain the workforce that they need to make it happen. Employment. We're excited about a workforce program that has actually got a lot of steam behind it right now. We have been partnering with shelter providers and employers across the community. Just this week, Food for Lane County, we've been working with them over the last several months to shift a warehouse training program that they had been doing to actually serve unhoused individuals. And so we have the first cohort of individuals going through that training program. The Chamber is bringing employers to the table to have opportunities for those folks to find employment after that program. We have 3 or 4 other pilots that we'll be launching to help provide jobs and workforce opportunities for unhoused folks who are willing and able to do that work. The last is public safety. Like I said, it has to be a component of this work. We are not talking about criminalizing homelessness, but we have to hold folks accountable and make sure our public safety system is built in a way that we can provide that accountability for the community. Lastly, and most importantly, we must include the how. These are the critical foundational pieces that frankly tend to be missing from all of those dozens of plans that we've seen in the past. It's going to be difficult, but we have to find alignment around these areas. The first is governance and accountability. How do we effectively delegate and govern the actions that we're committing to make sure they get done? How do we grapple with the system that we're currently operating under that wasn't built for the size and the scope of the homeless crisis that we find ourselves in today? Plans are worthless without someone being held accountable to actually achieving them, and we have to understand what governance model in our community is going to help us do that. The second is advocacy and policy change. There are critical policy changes that we have to understand and find some agreement around. We see ourselves in situations where sometimes our government and our nonprofit providers are not in alignment around which policies need to be happening and need to be implemented in order to do this work. So we have to get on the same level so we can do that advocacy at the local, state, and federal level together. Funding. How do we pay for these actions? So many of these plans we put together in our community in the past have no clear funding source, and it's why they end up sitting on the shelf. We have to understand where the money we're currently spending is going, where the gaps are, and if we need more resources as a community, what we can agree to do to make that happen. And lastly, communications. How do we communicate the plan out to the community so they have a sense of hope that we're actually going to get something done, that we're in alignment, that we're moving in the same direction, and that we're transparent enough to share those measurables and those goals and report out on how we're doing. Today, our chamber is so proud to be representing a larger group of community members. We might be convening it for right now, but we are one piece of this bigger puzzle. And these community members are rallying together around this shared vision and this goal to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. We knew going into it, this was going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And our government and nonprofit partners have been working hard trying to address this issue for years. And we have seen it grow to a size and scope that they can no longer manage on their own. We believe our only path to success is one where we all agree to go down together. And we are incredibly hopeful and grateful that business leaders, government partners, service providers, and community members, unhoused individuals are coming together to actually take those steps to move forward. I'm excited for you guys to hear from Mike, who is a part of our Business Leaders Task Force and one of the businesses that really has been a guiding force behind this, and Karen touching on those issues of housing that we know is such a critical component. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brittany, and thank you everyone for having me today. My name is Karen Sachs, and I'm the Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Strategic Relationships at Dev Northwest. Dev Northwest is an affordable housing developer, both for rental and ownership, and an asset building organization serving Lane and 6 other counties in Oregon. As an agency that serves multiple counties that include numerous jurisdictions, we have a unique understanding both to the extent to which our housing crisis is not isolated to local jurisdictions and how other communities within Oregon are working to increase affordable housing development. So for a bit of background and context and kind of where we currently stand, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis estimates that there's a current shortage of almost 140,000 homes across the state, and a projected shortage of over 400,000 homes over the next 20 years. Upon taking office, Governor Kotek signed 2 executive orders, one of which established a statewide housing production goal of 36,000 new units each year for the next 10 years, with at least half of those being accessible to people who are 80% below the median area in income. These homes are needed across the continuum, from affordable rental to affordable homes for ownership to middle income and market rate units. The crisis in the supply of housing is showing up here starkly. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Eugene is over $1,300. For a family-sized three-bedroom, it's almost $2,300 a month. And that's honestly if you can find an apartment to rent. Vacancy rates have hovered around 1% to 2% consistently in this community. And the home ownership side doesn't look much better. Median sales prices are around $490,000, and homes are selling within 7 days. So these numbers tell the story of a market that is not providing entry to low and moderate income renters or homeowners. Years of disinvestment into housing production, coupled with wages that are not keeping up with housing costs, are pushing people further into housing instability and stagnation. We work with renters on a daily basis who are trying to get into homeownership. They want to become first-time homebuyers. But as they're paying 40 to 50% of their income on rent, they cannot save for a down payment. It gets pushed further and further out of reach. For a family that's seen that house priced at $490,000, they need to come up with close to $100,000 in savings or other funds for a down payment to avoid mortgage insurance. And given the cost of everything from groceries to transportation to childcare, that can be an insurmountable hill to climb. So what do we need? What do we need to do? What's next? So from our perspective, we must increase the availability of affordable units across the housing continuum. We have to ensure that people can move throughout the continuum as their needs change. And our current housing market is not allowing them to do that. So to do this, it means local investment into housing development. The majority of affordable housing development sources are federal or state resources. They can be challenging to navigate and very prescriptive. But having flexible local resources can be a game changer. It not only demonstrates local support for a project, but it also enables unique projects that better fit local need to move forward. We need to have by right affordable housing development, which means removing arcane land use and site design requirements that has led to slow and cumbersome development. We shouldn't have to wonder whether a project will be blocked because the landscaping strip next to the driveway is 18 inches too narrow. And it also means combating NIMBYism. That shows up very strongly at the local level. It's about changing the narrative around housing. Housing should not be a luxury. The longer we block housing development, the more acute the crisis becomes. We need voices of support showing up at city council meetings, at planning commission meetings, and within your own neighborhood associations. And we know that we can't develop our way out of this overnight, but the best time to start is today. Everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to call home, and helping to ensure that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring requires that there are units available at every price point, at every size, and at the scale needed for our community. Access to housing supports our whole community, from the families that want to put down roots here to the entrepreneurs who shouldn't have to choose between starting their own business or buying a home, and to the employers who can then rely on a more stable workforce. Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Mike Coughlin, and I've been in Eugene moved here about 33 years ago with my wife Kate and my two young children, Nicholas and Allison. We've been in the same house in South Eugene for the whole time. We own Burley Design, which is a child trailer company, and we also own commercial properties, and we have a apartment building called Amazon Corner on Hilliard Street, which we built in 2018. So I'm also a landlord. I hope that doesn't offend anybody. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, I was on the board of and became the board president of Metropolitan Affordable Housing, which is now Cornerstone Community Housing. And this is 25 years ago, and back then we had a severe need for affordable housing in our community. And we haven't responded as a community to that. And because of that, we have a severe lack of housing, which has created a homeless problem in our community. And so you say a lack of housing is creating this homeless problem, and I wanted to talk a little bit quickly about book that all of our groups have been reading, and it's called Homelessness is a Housing Crisis. And it was written by a associate professor at UW, Greg Colburn, and a data scientist, Clayton Aldern, excuse me. And we were fortunate enough through one of our business task force groups to have Greg present over YouTube a little bit about his book and the cause of homelessness. So I wanted to just quickly talk about a few myths that people are hearing about or talking about, and really kind of get to the core of the issue. So we hear about poverty causing homelessness, mental health causing homelessness, drug addiction causing homelessness, unemployment rates, and serious mental illness. I probably mentioned that. And all these were correlated to homelessness across, the West Coast, Chicago, and the East Coast, New York. And there was no correlation between homelessness and those and these different issues. There were no correlation whatsoever. So you're kind of scratching your head saying, what's going on? So then they looked at temperatures. Okay, well, it's the West Coast, we have a homeless problem because we have milder temperatures and so on and so forth. There's no correlation there. Housing cost burden, spending 30% of your income on housing. And is that the reason for, if you have a community that's housing burdened, does that cause homelessness? No correlation whatsoever. In fact, there was a negative correlation to poverty and homelessness, which, it doesn't make any sense at all. So what they discovered was, and they, after crunching all this data, that vacancy rates in your local community and your rental rates are the main cause of homelessness. And if you look at Eugene, you look at Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, they all have high housing costs and very low vacancy rates. In fact, economists will tell you that if you have a vacancy rate in your community that's less than 5%, that you are underhoused. I mean, you do not have enough housing in your community. And it also, if you're under 5% vacancy, you also are now at risk of homelessness in your community. So if you kind of look around, the reason that mental health and drug addiction and everything is because if you have a limited supply of housing in your community, the folks that aren't going to be able to get to the table are the folks that have mental issues, drug issues, have long-term homelessness, and that live in poverty conditions. So those are the folks that they're not going to be able to compete if you have a severely restricted housing in your community. The other thing is, the other one that I just want to throw out is poverty. And so down south, you've got a lot of poverty, deep poverty. But they also have a strong supply of affordable housing. So they don't have a huge homeless problem. Which, so a lot of these things you hear about don't make, when you kind of actually look at the data, they don't make a lot of sense, but kind of when you think about it, it does. So, and of course, we have a very limited supply of housing in our community and across all spectrums, which you've heard earlier. So we need to fix that right away. The Register Guard recently published an article that talked about a 72% increase in our homeless population since 2018. So, and we don't have enough safe sleep sites, transitory housing, permanent affordable housing in our community to support what we have. So, and we don't have thousands of affordable housing units in the pipeline either. So, we're sitting in a situation where we know we have extremely low vacancies, extremely high rents, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. So what do we expect our homeless population to do? Do we think it's going to level out and go away? The data doesn't say that. I mean, if it's going to take us years to build out affordable housing. So this homeless issue that we have today, it's going to be around for a while. It's not going to go away, and so we need a long-term plan. And it's also expensive, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The other thing that's happening, and everybody knows this, it's been consuming our police department, our fire department, our park service, the parking folks were out helping the homeless cause. Our nonprofits have been run ragged. They can't get the staffing. We can't get enough nonprofits to even open safe sleep sites. So it's a problem that's continuing to mount in our community, and we need to get together and rally about what we're going to do about it. So, as Brittany mentioned, the city and Lane County and the Chamber have got together to produce an economic report to kind of show us what did we spend in a year, where did the money come from. And then the other thing that's concerning about that is a lot of the funds that we've been using to help with this homeless situation are one-time funds from ARPA and COVID money. So that money's not going to be around for a while. And the other thing, you're finding that you're starting to see now a lot of cities are starting to suffer because of this. Salem just put in a payroll tax to cover their police and homeless efforts. Corvallis closed a shelter because they didn't know about their funding. And I just read this morning that in Eastern Oregon, we've got some cities that are also closing shelters because they don't have any funding. So this is not a government problem, it's a community problem that we have to deal with and we have to look at at a community level. So we have a lot of different stakeholders that currently work on this. We have this situation. We have the city and the county, we have nonprofit service providers, we have the lived community, folks that are actually living on the streets. We've got the business community, the medical community, we've got the faith-based community, and the philanthropic community. So we have a lot of folks that are working on this issue right now that have stakes and have a stake in this, in the outcomes. And so we'd like to see, there's no overarching plan that everybody can work towards. And so we need to have that in our community. And that's what we're kind of driving for, is to get everybody at the table and have an overarching plan. Because it's an expensive problem and it's not going to go away. It's a long-term issue that we have to deal with. So that's kind of where we're headed with the Chamber's efforts. So the other thing is, and it's kind of the elephant in the room, we know that building more housing is the solution. And again, across all spectrums, and we've got everything from a shelter to some projects that Square One Villages and Opportunity Village are doing. We've got a lot of creative things happening right now in the housing arena, and we need to keep the pedal to the metal on that. You've got Homes for Good, Dev Northwest, St. Vinny, Square One Villages, Cornerstone, Habitat for Humanity. They're all working, building more housing, and we need to support those folks. We need to support with our time, and we need to support them financially. And then the other thing we need to do is, again, this housing is the elephant in the room, and we need to get our city councilors and Lane County commissioners together and make housing a priority. We talk about, we've got rules that we're going against landlords to protect tenants, and we got all sorts of committees that talk about housing, but we don't really have a group that's focused on building housing and with the funding. And so we need to make that a priority, because that's the solution to our problem. We've been buried in trying to just handle what's been happening over the last 3 or 4 years. So, and I don't like to, I kind of feel like a Debbie Downer here, but what we need to do is, I think folks need to get educated on the issues surrounding homelessness. And this book is a great place to start. And if you want to do the Cliff Note version, perhaps the Chamber can post this 30-minute video on their website, because it is fascinating. So getting up to speed on the issues. There's a lot of nonprofits that could use your help that support the homeless environment right now. So there's lots of nonprofits. They need board members, they need sharp board members, they need funding, and they need volunteers. So you can get out and also kind of get yourself enmeshed with some of the folks that are currently doing the work right now. So, so kind of in closing, from my perspective, I really think people need to kind of get up to speed on the issues, because there's so much haze with, they're here because we have all these great benefits, which they also did correlations on to look at the benefits that homeless people get coming into community. No correlation whatsoever. People aren't going to move, homeless people aren't going to move from one community to another to receive benefits, is basically what they came up with. So anyway, please consider helping volunteering and finding solutions. Thank you. Q&A? I think the Q&A is next.
Thank you, Mike Coughlin, Brittany Quick-Warner, and Karen Sachs for those remarks and for joining us at City Club today. It is so important that we make the time and space for these kinds of conversations and for the opportunity to learn about the issues facing our community. We are going to begin our Q&A in just a moment, but first, I also want to thank the business and in-kind sponsors whose support makes City Club possible. We could not do this work, we could not convene this kind of conversation without their support and the support of our members. So thank you to City Club's gold sponsors, Network Charter School, Hirschner and Hunter LLC, and Evans, Elder, Brown, and Schubert. And thank you also to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Pack Info and Simplified Computing LLC, Dotson's Photography, Ninkasi's Better Living Room, and Claim 52. Also a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC FM, for airing City Club programs on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Hello to all of you listening. For those who are listening at home right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning in to City Club on KLCC, and we love that you are here. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as the City Club of Eugene's YouTube channel and as podcasts. And there are several other programs in City Club's history directly addressing homelessness and helping us to dive into this issue. We'll now take a brief break and come back for the last part of our program today, the Q&A with our speakers. Thank you. Welcome back to the City Club of Eugene's July 28th program about ending homelessness in Eugene. All hands on deck. We are going to begin our Q&A today with a question from Turtle Award recipient and longtime thinker about homelessness, Steve Moe.
I'm not sure mine's a question or not, but what I'm going to say affects our homeless situation. And that is, first off, is the governor's mandate on global warming issues. And that's forcing communities to limit their growth within urban growth boundary and change the way that we build. We're going to have to build up and more concentrated, and that's going to drive prices up. So it's going to have an effect at the bottom. And also, as an effect of that, is changing our building codes all the time. And the cost of building is going up exponentially. So you want to borrow money to buy a house, 7% now, and if a builder tries to build a house now, it's going to be 3 or 4 years before he's able to rent it out. And there's all that cost in the meantime. And the cities, Springfield, I think, has sort of recognized that, but I wish the cities would get on board and help us get together and build these units, build them up, build them out, make them, I don't know how we can make them less costly, because these building codes coming through are just mandates. How do we do?
So maybe as a question to Mike Coughlin and Karen Sachs, both with development
So okay,
experts.
I'm done.
No. But to respond to Steve's question, what more could our local jurisdictions do to facilitate the construction of the housing that we need to address both a housing crisis and a climate crisis?
So I'm done.
Guess
Thanks.
this is me. I think that there are a lot of things that local jurisdictions can do. I think that some of the things I touched on, and I would reiterate, is that we can create more streamlined development processes, right? We can allow for public process and public input into development and not having local contrarian voices hold up the entire process, because when that happens, it makes everything longer and more expensive and the less likelihood that projects will actually move to fruition. Also, local funding is a huge sign of support. Dev Northwest just opened yesterday a second phase of an apartment complex in Eugene, specifically for homeless at-risk youth and youth aging out of foster care. We had major local support in that project. We had first in money. That was critically important for us to get additional funding sources, make it pencil, and have it move forward.
I might just add, it kind of goes back to the how that I was talking about. The plans that we've established in the past, we might have said, well, we need 6,000 more units, or we need to build X number of affordable, but we've never gone as far as saying, okay, but how do we actually change our policies to make that possible and affordable? And this is the hard part, right? And so we have to be willing as a community to do the hard part as well, which is actually aligning our policies with what our goals are around this.
And just a quick one, if you go back to the book, The Homeless is a Housing or Problem, they, on the supply side, so we're talking about the supply side for housing, so they talked about kind of the main issues on supply side were regulatory and topography, believe it or not. Topography. So, you know, we've got the South Hills, and it's not easy to build in the South Hills, yet we have a Envision Eugene study that shows that there's hundreds of building sites up there, when really it's not. You need flat ground, you know, with easy access to bus routes and retail shopping centers. So, and then on the regulatory side, I don't want to go into a lot of that, but it is difficult to build. You know, we've got not only code, the Eugene Building Code, but we have, I don't know, 14 or 16 different overlays over the building codes, and so we have neighborhood associations that have actually tweaked the code specifically for their neighborhood. So, you know, we've kind of taken that and just really made it into a mess. And if you talk any affordable housing providers in here, it costs 20 to 25% more to build the exact same apartment. This one's an affordable housing unit and this one's not an affordable housing unit. So they have a lot of other affordable housing providers have a lot of other hoops to jump through, and it drives the cost of this stuff up. Anyway.
It's another misunderstanding that affordable housing is not actually less expensive to build. Second question. And please also, all questioners, we have a long line to keep your question to about 1 minute at most.
I'm Jerry Smith, a City Club member. I'm a social worker and have been since 1965 working with the homeless. When we had welfare programs, much disdained by the very rich, there was grant money always aimed at housing. The current remainder of the welfare programs like SSI don't have in their total amount enough to cover rent. And that's part of the problem. We have literally abandoned the poor. It is a question of poverty and of abandonment. There is no agency now. We used to have AFDC and care for children, but as housing became a problem, the workers said, we cannot handle problems of housing, so they disregarded those people. That happened to the disabled people, that happened to elderly people. All last winter, I was working with an older woman in a wheelchair. She was outside all winter. No one would take her. When she was lucky, she had a tarp to cover at night. She used to be down at the library. The city's gotten crazy about shutting things down. She used to live at the library. She doesn't have that overhang anymore.
Jerry, would you ask our
Okay.
speakers what they would do about
Well,
that challenge?
yeah,
It's
I
very
wanna-
specific, and it's a good
Yeah,
question.
yes, I've almost got it done. There is no agency for the homeless. That's the craziest thing we could possibly imagine. If we knew who they were and what their problems are, I see them twice a week. I know some of their problems. I can refer them somewhere, but there is no place. We don't know how many there are. And Eugene, there was a myth out here that we're worse than New York or anywhere else. It's not true.
Jerry, I'm going to pause you here and ask our speakers to respond.
Yeah, but I'm almost done. What we need to do is recognize they're out there and they need to be safe. No one talked about caring about them as disabled, hurt, lonely, abandoned people who've been years in the woods, many of them, and there's no opportunity for them to go anywhere. We need an agency that focuses on dealing with people abandoned and homeless.
Thank you. Speakers, how might you address that concern?
I agree. We agree, right? And I think you're absolutely correct that it has become, it's a hot potato and people are tossing around responsibility and ownership. And at the end of the day, we're talking about human beings. We're talking about our community members and we're talking about our neighbors and we're talking about people who, as we come together, and if we don't have some agency or some entity that is taking the lead and is actually seeing that, as you're hearing, like there are coalitions that are forming and that is all fine and good. And what we need is actual, with authority, with funding, with actual support behind it, leadership in this space. And I would completely agree that we've seen a complete disinvestment and an otherizing of people through that in process for years.
So I think I've found myself over the last couple of years, it's really easy to get so overwhelmed with the complexity of this and the number of entities and organizations and government bodies and funding sources. And I think that remembering the individuals that we're serving is the way that you sort of focus that energy and you sustain, I think, the willingness to keep moving forward on this. It can't be there's no silver bullet, right? we have to make sure that we're looking at solutions at a whole lot of different levels. Our federal government has a massive responsibility that they have reduced their contribution to this, just like you said. But we have to figure out on a local level how to serve those individuals. And I think that comes back to the capacity of some of these nonprofits and these agencies that are doing that hard work day in, day out on the street, and making sure that they have the capacity to do exactly what you're saying. And so providing that support locally while we're pushing and advocating at the state, local, and federal levels, all of those things have to be happening at once.
The other thing is, this is a money issue too, unfortunately. I mean, we're taking a humanitarian crisis here, and we're limited by money at this point. And you know, the governor's plan, the $200 million all-in plan, $200 million is not even a drop in the bucket to address this situation. That goal across the whole state, they wanted to take 600 people off the streets. That was one of the goals across the whole state with that money. So we've got 3,000 people in Eugene living on the streets. So more than that. So, you know, this is going to be, it's all going to come down to money and how we solve this issue. And that's why, as a community, we've got to come together with one plan, because that's going to give us strength if we need to go try to raise a tax for this or a tax for that, or we're going to get grants to build housing and support these folks. If we have it together, we're going to, you know, we'll be successful. And I think the county, I just want to shout out to the county and the MAC group, and Kate Budd, you know, they brought $18 million in our community from the governor's plan, and they did that in about 3 weeks. So the government can move quickly if it needs to, and they did a phenomenal job. We got a very nice allocation from that, but again, it is a drop in the bucket. And a lot of this one-time funding from ARPA, you know, the COVID money, it's going to go away. And so we've got to have the plan if we want to be successful, that everybody's got to be together.
So one follow-up question that came in through email from one of our members that relates exactly to the point that you were just raising, Mike Coughlin. Deadlines are helpful, and people are concerned about the one-time funding that has come to help us address homelessness during the COVID pandemic, and to make sure that people had places to be during that time, and that there are one-time funds that have come to support services and people who are experiencing homelessness through the governor's declaration. What kind of a timeline are we looking at for when those funds are at their endpoint? What sort of a timeline do we as a community need to have in mind? Are we talking 6 months, 1 year, 18 months?
Yes. We got a lot of different kind of one-time funding sources that came into the community over the last several years. And when I talked earlier about the complexity of our funding system, is we have money coming in from the federal government, mostly being sent through the county as the continuum of care organization for our community. We have money coming in from the state. And then we have our individual jurisdictions who have, at some capacity, out of necessity, started to allocate their own general fund dollars or their own funding sources into this issue as well. So we have money that is being spent from different jurisdictions from a lot of different sources. Some of those are ongoing funds. Some of those are like the all-in plan dollars. For all intents and purposes, it's one-time funding. Our hope is that the governor will encourage that to be a sustainable source, but we don't know that right now. The city of Eugene, we spent time, myself and the mayor, up at the Capitol this year advocating for about $7.5 million for the city to continue their Safe Sleep Sites program. That program was started with one-time funds. Those dollars are set to kind of dry up end of 24, early 25. So we have a really short timeline. The city is grappling with a budget shortfall as is because they've been putting more money into this crisis. And so they're looking right now at how do we sustain the programs that we even already have, let alone the all-in dollars that were specifically designated for new programming in the community. So it depends which dollar source you're referencing, but there's a lot of deadlines over the next 2 to 4 years that we're going to see some critical programs asking some really hard questions about how they continue.
Quick one on that. President Biden, they introduced a plan. They called their plan the all-in plan, and then the state kind of took all in from that one. But the plan that was, the federal plan that was, or the Biden administration plan that was released in December, they've allocated a lot of money to ending homelessness. In fact, they said they want to reduce homelessness by 25% by 2025. That's a pretty lofty goal. The issue is all that money's going into major metropolitan areas where they have a chance to get, where they have the big numbers that they can roll over. So there's no money coming to Eugene for that kind of work. So again, that's all targeted at major metropolitan areas that have, that can move big numbers quickly.
Hi, my name is Evan Tucker, and I'm the fall 2023 intern for the City Club of Eugene. And I was wondering, what role does off-campus student housing play in the rising housing costs in Eugene?
Should I? I could probably talk about that one. Student housing is a different beast in our community. Most of these complexes are built without a town, financial institutions, REITs, big money managers, and so, and they have, those are built differently, there'd be multiple rooms, and so they're really kind of, I don't think they affect the housing prices that much in Eugene, and because I talked to folks down there, and we're involved in a project down there now, and they just said, hey Mike, it's a different story when you're down by campus building housing than it is in the rest of the city, and I don't know, if I can talk to that. But I don't see student housing driving rents throughout the city. Most people don't want to live in student housing unless they're a student. So, and everybody's scratching their heads on, man, they're building so many units down there. We're all, there's not that many students. I mean, the population is not growing that much. So we'll see, that may be available. I do understand that there are a lot of folks living in the student housing that aren't necessarily students, so.
I would say theoretically too, when we talk about the housing crisis that we're in, and Karen mentioned this, is that we need housing at all levels. So one of the hopeful impacts of the new student housing developments is that students are kind of shifting the demand of where they want to live and how they want to live. And what we hope happens is that opens up some of the single family homes that have been converted into student housing rentals. We hope to see some of those converting back away from just student housing and available to other community members. So while it's easy to see these large complexes go up and kind of scratch your head saying, how is this going to impact us negatively? There is a potential for an upside for our community. And we hope that down the road is some of the outcomes that we see, is that there's some housing, mostly around the university area, that could be perfectly good housing rentals for community members that are currently housing students.
And I will just say that it seems to be a priority to allow student housing to happen, maybe more so than other types of housing.
Next question.
Good afternoon. My name is Faye Venus. I'm an advocate for living. I'm also a co-founder of Community Supported Shelters. I'd like to invite us to, I'm really passionate about this topic, and I'd like to invite us to come together in our hearts with our passion around this topic and not commodify it around money, and action will only happen around money. I was blessed to create an amazing organization with Eric. We started with nothing. We had no money. We had passion, and we had love, and we had care for our community. And I believe that if there's the right people at the table around this topic, that we can create solutions and come up with solutions that are going to be less costly to the community. They're going to be more integrated. They're going to be more thoughtful and caring for the people that are really struggling. When I think about housing, a lot of the folks that I used to work with, they're not ready for housing. We need to rethink our housing. A lot of folks, they can't be inside. They don't know how to even turn on a stove or be okay alone in the apartment or the space by themselves. So part of our work is rethinking how we're going to house people. Not everybody wants to live in a nice place, maybe like you and I. You know, maybe some people are okay with just a really simple room with a sink and a toilet, and maybe that's what they need to heal to get to the next place.
Faye, could you frame that into a question for our speakers? It's a great point.
Thank you. The question is, how can we work together as a community from our hearts and with care to educate each other and walk this without framing it with money? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think you kind of stated, in my opinion, the answer in your question, and that's by educating each other. That was the first step that we felt like was critical when we were starting to bring business leaders together. It's really easy for community members who are kind of sitting on the outside watching this crisis to say, well, why don't they just do this, or this, right? And you come up with these, what feels like really obvious solutions as you're driving down the street and kind of thinking about it yourself. But the reality is, we have tried all of the easy things. All the low-hanging fruit solutions have been attempted, and it's going to take a lot more education and understanding of the barriers and of the what's working and not working before real innovation happens. And that was something we recognized early on at the Chamber, is that we didn't want to just barge into the conversation as the business community and say, this is what you should be doing. We had to understand what was working and not working first, so then that's when real innovation happens, and I think that's where caring happens, and that's where people start to understand not everybody needs the same solution. And this idea of transitional housing, of emergency shelter to stabilize individuals, we feel the same way about the workforce effort that we've been working on. There are individuals who are not, who can't find themselves on the street one day and in a full-time 40-hour-a-week job the next. That's just not reasonable. And so finding transitional opportunities where people can ease themselves back in to maybe a more common living situation, that takes time, and diversity of options. And I think community-supported shelters, a lot of these safe sleep sites, Square One, Shelter Care, so many organizations are offering a diversity of options for people, which is also important. We can't warehouse folks. We can't have a one-size solution for every single individual who's living on the street. But you don't realize that, and you don't think of it, poorly when you're trying to come up with solutions. But once you get to know the folks that you're working with, you understand we have to have different solutions for different people.
And I would just add that I think shame on us if we just have all the same people in the same room having the same discussion, right? So I think we also need to be thinking about the opportunities and the entry points for people with lived experience, people who are actually who we're talking about as those people, right? Those people need to be a part of the conversation, and we need to be thinking about our solutions in a way that actually honors and respects their voice, their choice, their humanity as part of this. I would also say that thank you. That also might mean that we need to completely change how we think about what housing means, right? It means that the systems themselves may need to completely change, and it means that the funding sources themselves may need to completely change. But that is not one person, that is not one organization doing that. That is community saying, we've listened, we hear, we know, because we've been told what people need, and here's how we want to approach the solutions.
Quick one. Just a quick one regarding the money, and it reminds me of Sister Monica Heron, and I don't know if anybody knew her from Sacred Heart Peace Health Hospital, but Sister Monica said, if there's no money, there's no mission. So that's another way to look at it. If there's no money, we're not going to get any of this work done, and it's going to be really expensive. So I don't think, there is the humanitarian side, but there's also the side of fixing the problem. And again, if we don't have the money to do it, we're not going to be successful.
And that, not surprisingly, is all the time that we have for questions today, with a long line of questioners remaining and about a dozen that have come in through email and our social media. Thank you all. This has been our July 28th, 2023 conversation at the City Club of Eugene with our speakers, Mike Coughlin, Brittany Quickwarner, and Karen Sachs. Please join me in thanking them for being with us here today. Also, a special thank you and acknowledgement to all the City Club volunteers who made today's program and all of our programs possible. This group of people do amazing work. Thank you especially to our program committee week in and week out, and to City Club's supporters and sponsors. We will be entering our August break after today. This is the final program of our 2022-2023 programming year, but we will see you again in September. In the interim time, might we encourage you to pick up some of the resources and others that our speakers have mentioned today. The book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, the film, which was mentioned before our program today, Invisible Class, and many resources available through the county's website, and a really robust dashboard of information that is available there. Please also follow the City Club on Eugene or on Facebook to find out more about our upcoming programs. We will certainly be following up today's discussion. So thank you all for joining us, being with us at the City Club of Eugene, and we look forward to seeing you when we return in September.